you after that. Oh, thank you very much, Jenna. Yes, we're recording. Sorry, just getting out of that one. So because we know that there are people who want to hear this who can't be here tonight. So we asked John if he would be okay with our recording it, and he is. And if you don't want your picture on the recording, of course, feel free to stop the video of your own picture. But we are very happy if you would like your face to be there too. So John, on his website, tells us something about how many books of poetry and prose he's written, but actually they're way out of date because he says 7, and I think it's 12 books of poetry. And he says 3 books of prose, and I think it's at least 4 and maybe 5. And we're going to show you some of them a bit later on so that you know. But I also want to tell you that I knew John Terpstra was the one person who lived in Hamilton that I knew anything about before we moved to Hamilton in 1996. Because he came to work on our soffits when we got here because the house needed all kinds of help. And the neighbors across the road told us about this guy called John Terpstra who lived down the road and could work on soffits. And I had been reviewing poetry in Ottawa, and I'd reviewed a book of poetry by this guy called John Terpstra. And I thought, that is really weird. Like, I've never heard this name before because I didn't know anything about the Dutch at that point. So when he arrived at the front door to mend the soffits, I said, this is probably a really weird question, but do you actually write poetry? And he said, indeed I do. And there started a long and fruitful friendship with John, both in terms of woodwork all around our house and in terms of words all around our house. So I'm very grateful that the words keep pouring out and the woodwork keeps happening too. And this evening, he's particularly going to talk with us about the words that come from this specific location, the ways in which we might understand both our relationship to the natural world, so-called, and also to the human-made world in and around Hamilton, which is something that he's thought about a lot. So, John, welcome. We're very, very happy that you're here, toolessly or not, and we will be very excited to hear what you'd like to share with us tonight. So let's welcome John. Can we clap? You can even put those little hands up if you like, you know. That's
the little icons, yes.
Yeah. I'm going to put my hand up.
You're going to mute your... Where'd my mouse go? Oh, there it is. Am I on? I'm on. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming, and thank you, Deborah, for inviting me. This is kind of a nice opportunity because to read from work that I've written that includes Hamilton in some way, because there's a bunch of it by now that I've written over a period of years. Before we start, Deborah asked if I would read a kind of a land acknowledgement. I've done a few of these that are a little bit different than the ones that we normally hear. And I'll just go from there. I'm going to be reading from various different books of poetry, and I'll read a little bit from some of the prose. Deborah's right. There's not, if that's what it says on my website right now, then it needs some updating because there's more than 7 books of poetry and there's more than 3 books of nonfiction now. Anyway, this is, I call this Acknowledgement Close to the Ground. We are gathered on the traditional territory of people who live close to the ground, who touch and are intimate with this patch of earth, its waters, who know and name the many more and wild animals with whom they share life and death here as brothers and sisters, who follow its creeks, and who dwell in the beauty of this place in ways we only imagine, bound as we are to the streets of the city and to the paths of settlement. So that's my little version of it. I often read that acknowledgement when before I give a tour of the Iroquois Bar, which is I wrote a book about this land form in Hamilton, and I opened a little tour that I give with that. And now I'm going to read a little bit from Daylighting Shadok, which is about a creek in Hamilton. And all I'm going to read is the epigraph, which is by Lee Miracle, who's an Indigenous writer who passed away recently. And this is from a book of hers called My Conversations with Canadians. Some of our people wish Canadians would move back to their original homelands. Not me. I hope they fall in love with the land the way I have, fully, responsibly, and committed for life. So I stuck that at the beginning of this book, and which came out a few years ago, 2016 or something, I'm not even sure. But it has a lot to do with this book, which is called Falling into Place, which came out in the early 2000s. And the subtitle for this book kind of says it all. This book is what happens when one person becomes completely enamored of the landscape in the city where he lives. So that's kind of the context out of which I'll be reading the various things that I'll be reading for you tonight. And the poem I'd like to start off with is a poem called Ceremony. And I wrote it after a new trail, was a waterfront trail was opened up in Hamilton. That was also in the early 2000s. What struck me and what strikes me often is that in our relationship to the landscape, to the natural landscape in the city and in nature, we're often tourists rather than people who actually inhabit the land. So this is called Ceremony. Some ceremony is involved in hauling the bicycles up from the basement, angling their awkwardnesses under ductwork around the stairwell landing, and through the needle's eye of the side door as one wheel spins free, ticking. The sun was singing down loud and glorious as we wove our two thin tire lines through town and to the bay, then through and around surprising numbers of walkers, strollers, rollerbladers of varying degrees of proficiency, and other cyclists, all of us twisting and braiding our various momentums together like a fat rope played out by the water's edge. And the gravel swallowed our tires as we left the paveway and headed toward the point, while volleyed in and out of hearing on the wind, we heard the beat of some hydraulic jack driving posts into the earth. Or some jack's boombox, I said, but came upon the backs of 3 white t-shirts there instead, and the draped jet hair and braids of 2 men and a woman sitting facing the open blast furnace of light on the water in the sky and drumming the sun down, singing rhythmic undulations over the chanted surface of the bay. A song that went nowhere musically and could have gone there forever. And the gravel swallowed our tires again as we quit the landfill point to be home before dark. And all I wanted to convey is the deep enjoyment of our early summer evening ride, the unexpected explosion of people at the new waterfront park, 3 generations after industry and E. coli drove them all away. And the 3 first peoples, this late in the game, chanting and drumming the sunset as an event in which they were participant while we looked on. So yes, some of our waterfront finally got reclaimed from industry, and it's still a very well-used park. But that's one of the things when you live in an urban area, isn't it? Especially one that was industrialized. The landscape is different than it is out in nature, and you have to do a little bit more to understand it, to become one with it, to become part of it. One of the things that I'm always aware of here, where we live in Hamilton, is that it's a glaciated landscape. It was created by water, running water, frozen water, water retreating, one or the other. And I wrote this briefer poem. It's in a season that we're all already, I'm sure, longing for, which is spring. That's a nice thing about poems. You can read a poem from any season you want, in whichever season you are in. And this poem is called Flagrants. 3 yards over, a neighbor is breaking small bunches of last year's weeds into the altar pan of his barbecue. He pushes them down till the fire catches, then quick draws back from its tender licking, laughing as his wife looks on, and talks to their neighbor on the other side, who's emerged into public view for the first time since moving in midwinter, and props himself by their fence like an old hand, inquiring after bylaws, garbage days. As a young daughter caroms out the door with a boyfriend, slinging the lightweight backpack of her beauty over a shoulder as she leaves her adieus booming off the walls of the house, abandoned. And the 3 crones in lawn chairs next door intensify their verbal concoction with shrieks of laughter, shrieks of crow. In spring's extending daylight, a coolness now returns. Having lured our willing, grateful skins outdoors, the flagrant air brushes its lips against our glacier's cheap and slow retreat, is kissing resistance goodbye. So resistance is a word. I just actually now remembered that I forgot to get the poem that I was going to read out of the book, out of the box, or out of my closet. Hang on now. Boy, that was a mistake. Anyway, one of the facts of life in the city of Hamilton is that we're right up against the Niagara Escarpment. And it's, the Niagara Escarpment is an act of God and something that is ever present in a person's life living here. And so it figures into many things that I've written. In a way, how do you understand rock? And, for a lot of people, Christians, rock is a difficult thing to understand because it can work to undermine a sense that the earth was created in 6 24-hour days. So it can be a little dicey sometimes. I remember I read this poem once at my alma mater, Trinity College in Chicago, and was wondering how it would go over. But it's one of the ways that I've tried to incorporate, I guess, what I think and believe with where I live. And this particular poem was written for Pentecost. And it was written a while ago, but my goodness, it's like Pentecost, it's even more pertinent. It seems even more pertinent. It seems more pertinent every day. So this is called Flames of Affection, Tongues of Flame. I walked to the end of Dundurn Street, to the quiet hind of a busy road where the bus loops. I walked to the foot of the escarpment and looked up, way, way up, at all those stairs. And though they are wooden stairs that make a nice wooden sound, And though they lean endearingly to one side or the other in a manner steel could never comprehend, there are still 246 of them. And before I was even halfway to the top, my legs had begun to feel lead-filled. And the next step seemed a millennium away, which, after all, it was in a way, since here I was scaling the rocky old face of Mother Earth, climbing her limestone chin, her sandstone, siltstone, shale, dolomite skin, terra mama, and all those labor-intensive layers of her makeup, so that when I reached the top, I had to sit and catch my breath. And there, down below, was our little city, lying spread out on its beach of glacial rubble, sunning itself on a completely other geological time. And I thought, well, here I am, 350 million years from home. God, but it's been a while since the foundation of the earth. All that time and no one to talk to. I was alone, sitting on the brow of the Niagara Escarpment, and except for the constant swell and surge of cars coming up Beckett's Drive to Garth Street or going down, it might have been peaceful. I tried to concentrate on Lake Iroquois or Algonquin, whichever prehistoric pond it was that lapped and bashed against this wall. But the sun had set, and stars were beginning to tinkle in the sky like wind chimes, and a million lights were coming to life. Car lights, street lights, porch lights, bicycle lights, night lights, and people in their dim homes were moving room to room, switching lights. So the whole lovely view flickered all the time, like lively little tongues, like the lively little tongues of lovers in the flame of affection. And I thought, this is like Pentecost. Kind of. How is it we can barely talk to each other anymore? 350 million years is nothing. We're at least that far apart, sitting across the same room. Switch the light. Is it just me? Or where on this hardened planet is there a hope? Our mutually exclusive, accrued believings of the truth will break down, soften, and flow together in the heat of some unimaginable quaternary change. Or do we grow old this way, waiting till the common weather finally erodes these bloody, unforgiving rocks into a willing roundness? There's nothing much to say. And it gets so tiring climbing the endless staircase of our wooden chit-chat, chit, chit, chat, chit. If only the window would blow open once and the conversation catch like fire, so that we're all consumed, and the room isn't big enough, and we take to the street and talk, and the languages we've learned to cultivate exhaust themselves, so we have to dig deeper and break out other mother tongues and get a bit drunk, spilling words we never said before, didn't know we knew. And we couldn't tell how long we'd gone till people stopped on their way to work, wondering, what the? But then they'd join in too, because it was contagious. It changed the face of the earth. And these 350 million years were like over. But here, today, the words we use, they fly, they arc, and dive through air, land where we don't look, won't dare. I pick up another, palm it, a stone chip off the top of this cliff, thinking I should bring it back home, put it on the table between us, show you, show me how hard it is, how long it's taken to get here. So, as you may have deduced, the poem was written a while ago because the stairs up the escarpment were still wooden at that time, not steel. I have this thing that goes on often with when I write about stuff that's in the city of Hamilton, within a few years, whatever it is I've written about seems to disappear. So I wrote about those stairs and then they disappeared. And there's been a couple of buildings that I wrote that entered my poems and then they disappeared. So I'm a little hesitant sometimes. It's easier to just write about the rocks because there's not a whole lot that you know, I should watch myself. I was going to say there's not a whole lot that will be done with the rocks, but you never really know. You never really know. One of the so I've written a lot of poetry that I read on Sunday mornings in church, but one of the challenges that I've had, the hardest thing to write about for me anyway, was Easter. It was a tough one. I didn't exactly avoid it, but I never had the opportunity, and I wasn't ready until this. This is a more recent poem. And it also takes place on the escarpment. So I thought I would read it. And it's on the Bruce Trail. So some of you may have actually walked this at one point or another. And there's one section, it's above Canterbury, whatever it is, Canterbury Hills, if that's what it's called, the Anglican place there. Yeah, I guess everybody here should know about that. Right above that, there's an area where these big rocks have disengaged from the landscape, from the escarpment, and are on their way down. But of course, like everything in the escarpment, it's in slow motion. It's quite a dramatic sight. Anyway, this poem is called Topographies of Easter. We are walking in the mild midwinter snow and thin ice up Coldwater Creek, its many tributaries. Their steep ravines tracing the blue and brown lines that wind dizzily over the unfolded whiteness of our new map, like staves for the crazy earth song we've been sight reading with our feet. We are singing the impossible pitch of these slopes and cliffs, losing our place in a landscape that lives to improvise. And the map helps, but nothing written is in stone. And it's always a revelation, stopping to compare what's on paper with being there. Because I did not for a moment doubt in childhood the story of this rising, shall I, now I am wiser? The world still has no boundary. The lines still shiver and wave. The impossible takes place. People are kind. And these woods are still as real and magic as when I first chased and followed any path that found me, and just as fearful. And brown death still haunts the green, discoloring all in brilliant falls ground to sodden mulch, from which, in deepest regions of the wood, the bright stem still rises, witnessed by those few who run like children home to tell us. I'll say this, whom she supposed to be the gardener sings and dances the contour lines that are his body. This body that is broken by time and season and violence too deep for us to wonder at the source, broken into beauty that lures our present rambling and leads us to the edge of this escarpment, where the waters fall, where all our many streams cascade and plunge in curtain and ribbon over terrace and washboard, our terms for the living text, earth's open veins. And where we meet her, who has run and sung and danced these trails since the day she first saw the massive rock dislodged from the cliff face of any reasonable expectation. And all these years removed from childhood, we still leap aboard to feel if it shifts or moves us, trusting and not trusting, not willing and willing the rock to roll on. So that's that little one. I like the earth's open veins for creeks. I always like that. I mean, it's a kind of a gross image, but at the same time, it seems to me to be entirely apt. So of what it is, of what creeks are. So, and I've got more stuff that's on creeks as well. I did some research on for writing Daylighting Shadok. I did research and found where the source was for Shadok Creek, the creek that's gotten such bad press in this city because of the spill in the umpteen billion liters of sewage that went down it. This was a creek that in 1879 or 1789, when the first settlers came up from the United States, the Hess family and others, but the Hess family settled where Shadok Creek, where the spring was, and they called their farm Spring Farm, and it's in the area of Lime Ridge and Mohawk Road. Lime Ridge, Mohawk, Upper James, and West Fifth, if you can kind of imagine that quadrant. It's in there. Hard to believe now, but that was farmland up there. And anyway, that got me thinking about things. I've done lots of creek stuff recently, and what we do with water in the city is pretty emblematic, I guess, of how we treat nature in general. And it also gives us an opportunity to rectify things if we are so minded. So this is a brief history of settlement on Hamilton Mountain from 1789. We came to a place after many days walking, the top of a cliff, a plateau of wood and meadow, and followed a creek to its sweet water source below an outcrop of rock, tall enough to provide a broad view of this oasis from the strife we had so recently suffered in another land. We gave thanks and chose to stay, as did all our company, each family planting itself beside spring and pond of creeks whose paths they traced from waterfalls over that long cliff which served as a protective rampart to our community for 7 generations, until the young city mounted its height, stormed our fields and woodlots, buried creeks in pipes, and sent springs into hiding beneath the trees, the few left standing. The trees, those intermediaries between ourselves and our maker, whose roots never cease to divine the living waters that my people, naked under shower heads, with kitchen faucets running full blast, forget. So that's that little ditty. I wrote another little ditty that's, we're getting a little more political here, folks. But I don't know, it's political and not, I don't think it's necessarily, well, I think all poetry, I guess, is political as well as being religious by nature. But this one that I'm going to read for you is has to do, it also involves a creek, but it's a creek on the other end of the city. And what we did on that side of the city, Red Hill Creek, is we built a highway beside it because highway valleys prove irresistible in an urban setting. To sticking a highway through it. Don Valley in Toronto is another example of that. And there was a lot of protest about that highway. People were jailed. People put themselves up in trees and stayed there. I was at an event where things were red on one side and the highway path had been cut through, and we could see the people up in the trees. They lost, they had to come down in the end. And the highway came through, and it opened in 2007. I just looked that up. It seems like it's been there forever now, of course. But then I also remember something that the bookseller Brian Prince once told me, which was that he was fully prepared to wait until the day when, looking out the front window of his store, he saw horses and carriages go by instead of cars. And this is called The Highway That Became a Footpath. And it starts with a little bit from a book you may be familiar with called the Revelation of St. John. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And I saw the holy city coming down out of heaven. And the holy raving protester who climbed into a tree to resist the building of the last highway was still in among the leaves, but the tree had grown much taller, and the protester had been living up there for such a long time, not alone, that several generations of protesters now populated the canopy, freely trafficking the branches of their swaying neighborhoods as the 6-lane highway wound between the trunks below, as wide only as a footpath, a red dirt earthway busy with pedestrians. And the highway that became a footpath led past the longhouse raised during the same resistance down in the valley, for it still existed. Both longhouse and valley existed still. And other longhouses, which were standing at that location several centuries earlier, had rematerialized, their hearth fires burning still, an entire village thriving beside the hallowed creek that ran through the east end of the city. And I saw the trees that formed the longhouse walls take root and continue to grow, 40,000 times 40,000, their canopy providing all the roof that the people needed. And from a privileged perch at the top of the escarpment, watching as the new city came down out of heaven, it was clear that the leaves of those trees were for the healing of the community. Well, it's been half an hour now, so perhaps I should leave it at that. What do you think, Deborah?
I think it would be a wonderful time to have some interactions with people, John. That's lovely.
All righty.
Thank
That
you so
sounds
much
good to
for all
me.
these words. As long as we get a little bit more of the words that fly an arc before we stop. So maybe we could have 10, 15 minutes when we chat with people and see what they'd like to ask you. And then maybe you could read just one or two more things before we stop. How would that be?
Sure enough. Sounds good.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is your time. It's just such a privilege to have someone who can put into words our relationship to the world around us in the way that John does. And I think I have lots of questions, but then I always do, and I don't want to hog the limelight here. So let's see who would like to ask something of John about his writing, his relationship to the world, as he said in his little blurb that he sent us, as a believer and a maker. how do you relate to this glorified and abused place we call home? Who would like to start? Who's got something that is, burning, that you're feeling like, I really need to know that, or I'd like to suggest that, or I'd like to respond in this way? Who'd like to begin? Daryl has his mute off, so I'm thinking that may mean you've got something to say, Daryl. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Janice and I are Jenna's mom and dad, so we're very pleased to join in with you tonight. We attend St. Luke's Anglican in Burlington. And John, I'm wondering, why do the poems of place why are they so compelling to us? It's not just about our place, because when I read Wendell Berry, I find those poems compelling too, and I don't live in Kentucky. So why is it the poems of place are so much draw us?
Yeah, it's a good question. In our culture, you kind of grow up or grow into the sense that it's a virtue to be able to pick up and leave at the drop of a hat, either pursue a job or to pursue your own dream. So very little sense of place is involved with that. And I guess even the fact that it's an immigrant continent, what the people here, we've been here for 200 years or whatever, but everybody moved from somewhere else to be here. I mean, my parents moved, Deborah and John moved. There's lots of people that. So, and I guess in some ways, you're both more loosely attached, and then some of us are more strongly attached. And there's probably as many people who, for whom these poems would not resonate as for those who do, I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there who strongly resent personal attachment to a landscape. Because if there is that personal attachment to a landscape, that means that their plans for that landscape as real estate may be thwarted. I mean, when you live in a place and you live in it for any length of time, you're going to have to be a pretty hard-hearted person to not eventually have that place work its way into your heart, into your being, regardless of what kind of landscape it is. I mean, I think this landscape here is unbeatable. And then I see other landscapes around, or you watch something and you see that landscape in the Southwest. We were just watching a show that's in the Southwest of the United States, and you think, oh, I could live there. It's a transplantable thing, but yeah, it does go very deep, doesn't it? The sense that, and it probably has to do with our physicality, our own physical being, and the need to touch where we are. I don't know. I'm just rambling.
I was going to say, John, somewhere in your work, you talk about we're made of this stuff, this shale, this clay.
Yeah.
I think that connection, which is to do with the physicality you're mentioning, is also why, or it's an extension of why we care so much about place. We're made of it. We've grown out of it. I mean, that's part of our story as people of faith as well, isn't it? We're made out of the earth, and I find that fascinating as a way of helping to think through, why are we so connected to the land? I don't know what you think about that. I've forgotten where it is you say that about we're made of this stuff.
Yeah, it's somewhere in Falling into Place.
Yes, good. Okay.
Yeah. The clay. Yeah, which is it's a pretty amazing kind of thing to contemplate, isn't it? And there's always that whatever, it's like a Trivial Pursuits question or something. Aren't the percentage of all the elements or minerals that are in the universe are contained in that same percentage in our bodies? Something like that. Some amazing, wonderfully little resonant tidbit of information.
Let's ask other people, other things that you'd like to get John talking about, mulling over, or telling you about in terms of his writing or his relationship to Hamilton. Who else had something they'd like to ask or to raise? Just turn off your mute and let us know if you've got something you're interested to raise here. Anybody else got something on the tip of your tongue that you're thinking, yes, that would be an important thing to know? Go ahead.
Sure.
Oh, Vanessa and then Sarah. Let's have Vanessa first and Sarah second, okay?
I forget which poem it was that you read this, John, but it was something along the lines of the path you chase found you, something like that.
Say that again. Is a
The path that you chase found you. Am I remembering that correctly?
the path you chase down to?
The path you chase finds you.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah, I was just
As
curious.
when I first chased and followed any path that found me.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that line?
Well, one word came after the other, and then I just left them in that order. It's always dicey when someone tries to explain why they wrote one thing or another, because sometimes you don't really know, but the sense is that you choose a path to go on, right? But sometimes the path chooses you, and that's basically all it is. There's a path that may find you to put you on it, rather than you actively having gone out to seek that path. Something like that, along that line.
I feel like that sensibility, John, has actually grown in your work. The notion that the natural world is active in the world, that it like you talk about Shadoke Creek. I mean, that it's looking for you, right?
That there's a certain agency that the earth has. It's always a dicey kind of territory to wander into, but yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sarah, sorry, go on.
No, well, so there's some reciprocity going on there. The earth isn't inactive in responding to us being there and to whatever we may be thinking or feeling about it as well. It's not as inanimate as it looks. It's living as well. And yeah, okay, I'll leave it at that. I mean, it's a kind of thing one explores for themselves, right? And some of this stuff is if you've had any kind of a response, or if you feel like you've had any kind of a response from the earth, you can't. I mean, can I even say that out loud? You'd want to have me locked up for saying something like that. But
I don't.
When you've been in a,
don't you
pardon
think?
me?
I think it's easier for people in a Christian context to talk that way, because
Possibly.
we've got the book of scripture tells you all the time that the trees sing and the rocks call out and the stars have voices, and so why wouldn't we increasingly become aware of them in the way that you do in what you write? It seems to me we've got kind of carte blanche to make that real. You've got it seems like a natural connection for me in your work because of where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not something that I sort of adopted as an idea that I thought would be cool. It's an experiential thing. So, yeah.
Sarah, what were you going to ask?
Well, I see Graham and Emma had their hand up too, but I can talk first. Yeah, John, why do you think you've developed a love of place? Like you mentioned, some people can maybe come to resent where they are, but why for you have you come to love it? And do you think other people can come to love place the same way you do? Oh
yeah, easily. Why not? They should. I think there's other people that already do, for sure. I'm always kind of a little stunned by how.
But what does it take to cultivate that love of place?
Time and effort, being there, being attentive. I mean, I was aware of where I was. It's harder in a city. That's what it is, eh? And Hamilton is actually a good city to cultivate this awareness in, because you still have nature. You have nature in an unavoidable sense with the Niagara Escarpment. It's just staring in your face all the time. But then the city's also small enough so that you can deke into the Dundas Valley in a very short period of time, or we were on the North Shore trails today in the Arboretum, and it's just actually quite stunning to be there and to realize that you're also in an urban area. That sure helps. But even so, you know, I mean, the way I describe it in Falling into Place, it was a good number of years of traveling this route that I took to work for the landscape to actually start to, you know, ask its questions of me, you know, for me to notice, to wonder why this was happening, why I was going up and going down. That's something as simple as that. And then one thing led to another. So, you know, it's a little like God. It's there all the time, but unless you pay attention, notice, and start investing yourself in it, there's no back and forth that's going on. And once the back and forth starts happening, then anything else can happen as well. So, and it can happen really anywhere. This is, I just read the, what was it called? I'm not sure what it was called. That book, there's a graphic novel that came out recently in Hamilton about the 1946 strike, which also involves the Brightside neighborhood, a neighborhood that basically does not exist anymore. And it's got a few houses in it, but you wouldn't want to live there. But you talk to people who did live there, and their affection for the place is just kind of stunning, you know? And here it is in the middle of all this industry, and you think, okay, well, this can happen any place, you know, and it's a tribute both to the place itself and to the capacity of the human heart, I think, you know, that can happen.
I think you're right though that, sorry to jump in. I think you're right though that nature makes it easier. I was in Toronto earlier this winter and it was so overstimulating that I felt like it was teaching me to ignore. Whereas when I go in the woods, I feel like the woods is teaching me to slow down and notice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I agree. You have to be careful though, right? I mean, what was I looking at the other, I was reading this book that someone gave me called How to Do Nothing. And it's about basically finding a way to practice contemplation or stillness within the city, but they went to a park to do it, right? And then learned about nature in the park. And I thought, oh, look, and then learning to identify the plants and the wildlife, and that's, I mean, I agree with that for sure. But it seems to me too that the built geography has its own things that you can contemplate. The brick. This might not appeal to everyone, but styles of houses, you know, from, especially if you live in certain neighborhoods that are not suburban, you know, where you have, like our neighborhood has houses that were built probably in every decade from the 1850s on. So it becomes really interesting to look, to just stand and pay attention to where you are. Both the natural setting, because there's always something going on that way, but also the built geography too has its own things that respond to being attended to. So, but yeah, when you get a city the size of Toronto, that's pretty overwhelming. It's true.
John, could I just ask you to say a little bit about Falling into Place, because it's possible that not everybody here knows this book. And I know that when I first read it, my experience of Hamilton shifted fairly dramatically.
Oh, is that right?
Being able to see through your eyes to understand the ground under my feet made a real difference to me as a fairly new immigrant to Hamilton. So I thought maybe you could describe it a little bit for people so that they know what you did in that book.
Okay, well, as I was saying, it was, I lived in the city of Hamilton on Herkimer Street. Actually, I knew someone who was doing some of the renovation work at St. John Evangelist at the time. Our daughter went to school with her father. I was going to up on York Boulevard, across York Boulevard, and then going down, like you go to the Arboretum there, you know, the Arboretum under the 403 and up on top. And then my shop was just on the other side of the railway tracks. And I had done this for a bunch of years before I started wondering, okay, now why am I going down here under the 403 and then coming right back up? And why is York Boulevard like as high as it is compared to the water. Why is the water on both sides lower? And I ended up discovering that this was actually what I was driving on was a glacial sandbar from a lake that they call in the books Lake Iroquois. It was the last glacial lake, the remnant of the last ice age. In the same way that Beach Boulevard and the Skyway, that spit of sand there that the Skyway goes over was created by the present lake, Lake Ontario. Lake Iroquois created this Iroquois bar, and the shoreline of it goes all the way to the Niagara River. It's what the King Street rides on, you know, all the way there. And once I saw that, or once I discovered that, and it was kind of my discovery, because I hadn't heard anybody talk about this glacial sandbar that was running through the city, and it runs from St. Joseph's Hospital, like it starts at the escarpment at St. Joseph's Hospital, runs diagonally through the city. Scottish Rites is built on top of it. You know, it's an elevation that attracted rich people. Scottish Rites is built on it, and then Mount Zion United Church was built on it, and where the Good Shepherd on King Street is, that's all higher there, you know. And when I realized that, my one thing that I had thought growing up, because I grew up in the suburbs in the West Mountain, and watching the suburbs overtake the landscape there, my basic learning from the item I learned from that was that when human beings come into a landscape, the landscape loses and there's nothing left. But what I discovered was that it still is there. The sandbar is still here, and nature is still here under the city. It may be, you know, the high places may be taken down and the low places may be filled in, but it's very hard to remove nature completely. It's there, and that when you start learning about it, then you become participant in what was there, is still there, not physically, but it's still there. You know, all time is one time. It's still there in some capacity, and you become participant in that. So it's quite a revelation, and sort of astonishing to be in that place where that can happen. So, I mean, I applied it to the Iroquois bar, but there's more in the city that works that way too for me. So you're in a place that has a resonance that goes a little deeper than what you just see out your car window when you're going by.
If you think, take the next step for us because of our context, and say, okay, once you've understood that, once you've seen that, once you've perceived it, how does it relate to being a believer and a maker? How does it relate to your faith?
How does it relate to it's jeepers, Deborah. Why don't we just ask the difficult questions, okay? Oh. You know me, eh? I play my cards close to my chest that way. So
I do, and I'm pushing you.
I don't know what you're going to get out of me now. I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to drink my water.
Okay, you can do that. Then I will also ask you to say something about. I mean, you did talk about the broken body of the earth being in some way like the broken body of Jesus.
In some way.
Yeah. So does that relate?
I think I made a one-to-one correlation there, Deborah.
Does that relate to the Iroquois bar? Does what we do to the earth relate to our relationship to the broken body of Jesus?
Oh yeah, that's what. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would say that's playing your cards close to your chest, John. I would say that's showing us what you have in your.
Well, you're squeezing it out of me now, aren't you? It's right. It's right there in the book. It's right there in Falling into Place, and it's in a lot of other places. But it's kind of, you know, I don't advertise it. I don't advertise it as explicitly maybe as others might. But yeah, no, that's how I view it. This is what we're doing to the earth is what we're doing basically to Christ's body, for sure. That's how I would put it. I mean, what make of that what you will. I guess what it's doing for me anyway is it's pointing out the absolute and utter seriousness of the whole thing. So,
Thank you. Susan has a question.
As you're talking about the earth and the identifying the maker, and now you're talking about the sacrifice. Do you see the earth as redeeming us, sanctifying us?
Whoa. I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that. I don't know how as the earth as sanctifying us. Wow. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Deborah, answer that question for me, would you? Because
I roll, John.
I don't know.
Insofar, I guess you have talked about insofar as the earth speaks to us and enables us to see more than we would otherwise see, and perhaps gives us a new freshness, a new awareness of history, a new awareness of our relationship to it. It's not exactly redemptive, but it is a beginning of blessing. It does bless us in that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a reciprocal relationship, right?
Yes.
And that's the main thing. It goes two ways. It's not us just enjoying nature, I mean, it's a funny thing. We owe our very lives to the food that grows out of the ground that we walk on. It's hard to warrant what we do to it in return for that, and how we continue to just use it for our purposes, and how little we put back into it, or how little we respect this. Did you ever read The Giving Tree, that book by Shel Silverstein? I mean, it's an amazingly powerful book, and it's really illustrative of what human beings to nature, which is they just keep taking until there's nothing left to take. It's a very strong parable that I'm not sure where it leads in the end. But with every fiber of my being, I'd like to go in the opposite direction of that.
Thank you. I think we've got time for maybe one more question, and then we'll ask John to read one more thing, and then we should think about stopping, because this has put him on the hot seat for a very long time. But let's see, is anybody still dying to ask a question who hasn't yet done so, who's got something that they'd like to raise? Because this would be your moment to do that if you'd like to.
She said, sorry,
Anybody
but-
who's not said anything yet who'd like to do that?
You don't have any more difficult questions, do you, Deborah?
Oh, usually. Maybe we could look at what Graham is saying in the chat box here. He says, maybe it's that what you do is provide a translation of the praise that the rocks cry out, given that many of us are not fluid in nature. I'm interested in the idea that artists of faith can be conduits of the praise that God is due. That's a nice comment that Graham is making there. So
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because you always don't want to think that you would be the conduit of anything. Or I mean, I don't want to sound falsely humble or something like that, but I'm just trying to write what's there for me to write, and then speak it aloud. And that's the basic motivation.
And I guess one of the things we can add at that point that I didn't say at the beginning is that lots of people have recognized in these books of John's that he does that really well. And that means he's won all kinds of awards, locally and nationally, for his books. His name is not a name that's known only in Hamilton, even though he's writing so much about Hamilton. He's known all over the place, and rightly so. I think you can hear that. Now, having thoroughly embarrassed you, I want to ask you please to read us one or two more poems, John, whatever you'd like.
Okay, I'm going to read, okay, I'll read. I'm going to read you the very end of this book, Daylighting Shidok, okay? Because it's just, and this is all about creeks. I'm currently involved in an effort to have a certain section of the creek that's in downtown, just before it goes into the 403, kind of made into a park. And that's a hard thing in a city, for a city to turn around from burying creeks and doing that, having that kind of approach to nature, to having another one, to having one that respects it a little bit more. But it's a tough row to hoe, you know? I mean, because so many forces go against respecting the natural environment, especially in an urban setting. So the way that I end this book on Shidok Creek is trusting that this meandering line of words would one day find the sea. All I really wanted to do is remember my first loyalty and keep faith with the creek while pursuing and being pursued by it, traveling upstream and down through this landscape of valley and highway, culvert and gorge, stone house and suburban development, pollution and vandalism and beauty, with a spring and a prayer. Now, considering all that Shidok and the waters of the world must deal with while continuing to sustain life, I'll have to let that faith keep me. So, and then this is a poem called Giants. There used to be giants, and they loved it here. They'd sit their giant hinds in a row along the top edge of the escarpment and pick at the loose rock with their hands or their feet, then throw or skip the smoothest stones across the bay to see who could land one on the sand strip 3 miles away. Or they'd spring themselves off the scarp top like you would off a low wall and go running all the way to the end of the sandbar and jump across the water to the other side, or jump in, splashing and yelling up the ravines, chasing each other's echoes. This was only a few thousand years ago, and the giants were still excited about the glaciers, which were just leaving, about not having to wear their coats all the time, and what the ice and water had done, shaping and carving this gentle, wild landscape. They loved it here. I'm telling you, they absolutely loved every living minute here. And they regretted ever having to leave. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yay, thank you, John. This was a really wonderful reading. If any of you would like to get a hold of any of John's books, here are some of the ones from which he has perhaps already read this evening. And these are all available through Epic Books on Lock Street, and they have an online site where you can order as well. They have all of these books in stock right now. So it would be lovely if you felt like choosing one. And maybe if you drive past John's home on Lock Street North, south, he might, no, north, that's right. He might even be prepared to sign them for you. Who knows? Do you think you would, John? Would you?
Yeah, I think that might happen, yeah.
Okay, so take a look at all of those anyway and see what you find. But you know, we really do want to thank you, John, because it's such a treat to hear someone read who not only writes well, but also reads well, which is not actually always the truth, I have found.
Right.
Authors. And so thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you very much.
For all that you've given us. It's really lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Lots of applause.
Thank you, everyone.
We can put up those little hands, can't we? I've learned how to do that now. There we go. Little hands up at the top.
The little hands, yes.
Thank
Yes.
you very much, everybody, for coming this evening. I should mention that this session has actually been recorded. Jenna has done a recording, and it will be available through the St. John's website for those of you who would like to share it with other people, which I think is a lovely thing to be able to do, or even if you just want to listen again, which is also a nice thing to be able to do. So we look forward to hearing from you on that. And Jenna and I are going to work out how the heck we put it on the St. John's website, but that's a different problem. That's just another of these technical issues that I'm sure we can solve. So thank you, everybody, and good night.